Sing Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commands and commands us to engross ourselves in words of Torah. Amen. All right, now, chapter 4, the throne of God. And before we start that, I think I need to do a little bit of kind of put this all in context and do a little bit of history review for you, and because some people haven't kind of give you a little historical background on where we're at, because it's important that we understand chapter 4 tonight. The date of the writing of this was about 95 CE or AD, however you want to count that, and it was written by, of course, John the Apostle, and he had been exiled to this prison island of Patmos by the Emperor Domitian at and probably he was exiled out there because of his opposition to this imperial cult, or the emperor worship, or that sort of thing. So it's amazing that they just didn't have him killed, but that wasn't in God's plan, because he wanted him to relate the book of Revelation. Now, this guy, I had mentioned the emperor worship. This is important to chapter 4. This Emperor Domitian, he did not initiate the custom of calling the Roman emperors gods. He didn't initiate it, but he certainly put it on steroids. He encouraged it. Now, he was a tyrant of the first order, and in many respects, this was an effort to control his empire with this emperor worship, and so that requiring the crowds to consider him a deity was all part of this control. So let's go ahead, and I know he insisted on people calling him Master and God. So, that's even worse than me trying to get my granddaughter to call me Exalted Grandfather. That lasted about a week, and, actually about a day. But anyway, that's what Domitian insisted on being called, was Master and God, Lord and Master, something like that. And here's a bust of him. Kind of flatters him a little bit because he wasn't that good looking, but anyway, that's a picture. There were several other busts of him, and a lot of them had the nose missing and so forth. So I figured I'd put this one up so that at least we don't have to do a reconstruction on his nose, so that you can see what he looks like. And this imperial cult, the emperors were believed to be mortal manifestations of the divine and were worshipped as gods. And some of them made worship mandatory, and of course that was a problem for the Jews and later on the Christians. So this idea of worship of an individual would have been problematic for the Jews and the Christians. But it didn't even stop in the Roman era, because later on, in Europe they didn't have king worship, or but they had what they call the divine right of kings. It was an implied idea that the king was put on there by God, and therefore he had a right to rule any way he wanted to, because he was there by the providence of God. All right, so let's go ahead and get into chapter 4, and let's look at Revelation 4 and 1. After these things I looked, and behold, a door was standing open in heaven, and the first voice which I had heard speaking with me like a trumpet, saying, Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after these things. Now, this chapter, chapter 4, it begins the final division of Revelation. It's important to remember that Revelation is an apocalyptic work, and these apocalyptic books or works were very popular among the Jewish people in the 200 years before and the 200 years after Yeshua. Why was that? Well, because they were under a lot of persecution. Even though they were in the land, they were still under a lot of persecution. And so this audience that John was writing this book to, we got the 7 churches that we talked about. And then it says, whoever has an ear, let him hear. So these things were distributed well beyond the seven churches. But this audience that John was writing to knew very well what he was talking about, because the apocalyptic literature was popular. That genre was very popular, and they understood it. They'd been exposed to it for a couple of hundred years, by almost 300 years by this time, and there were several of these books. For instance, the book of Enoch is a very, very famous book of apocalyptic literature, and we've covered that in past classes as to what the apocalyptic literature looked like and why it was important that we understand that. These people, they understood the symbolism, and so when he said he saw a door opening up in heaven, they understood that this was not a open the door, to some creepy mansion like or something, or the pearly gates going just swinging wide open. They understood that this was a prophetic door, a visionary door, because the same kind of language was being used in other apocalyptic books, almost exactly the same kind of language. Now chapters 2 and 3, those were literal. Those were things he was writing to them, things that Yeshua told him to write, and he was writing to real churches, real people with real problems at that time. And you remember, each one of those churches, he addressed them in a manner that addressed certain problems within their congregations, and there were also things that were characteristic of their congregation. Like with Laodicea, I wish you were cold or hot, but not lukewarm, because that I'll spit it out, I'll vomit it out, as the Greek actually says. And so we have to know then that, okay, they're talking about high mineral content water that, in its lukewarm state was pretty yucky. So those 2 chapters, 2 and 3, were for real people at real times and real problems. But once we start into chapter 4, it becomes that's the last part of Revelation, and of course it goes from 4 all the way through to chapter 22. Because remember, the first was I'm going to show you things that were, things that are, and the things that must be after this, or things that will come. So John heard a voice, and this was it was the same voice that he heard in chapter 1 and verse 15, but the voice sounded differently now. Before, it was like the sound of rushing waters, a waterfall. Think going to Niagara Falls and the the water falling and are you going by rapids or something like that. It makes a noise, and it's tumultuous, and it's kind of a roar. But now this voice, in fact, they had the same kind of thing in Daniel. If you remember when we were in the book of Daniel, and Daniel described seeing someone that appeared to be like the Son of Man, that his voice was like the roaring, rushing waters, but it just gives the idea to me of loud and in some ways maybe not so clearly defined. However, now in this one we see in chapter 4 that it says it's the sound of a trumpet, slant, shofar. They had both in the temple. They had trumpets and they had shofarim, shofarot. And but to me now, this is just my thinking, is that the sound is much more distinct, and it is maybe more precise and more well defined. Rather than just the power and the awe of a great big waterfall, that now it, instead of the sledgehammer, this is the surgeon's scalpel. Maybe we could look at that's what when I read this and thinking of the trumpet sound, I'm thinking very crystal clear cut notes or words, as opposed to the roar of the water. Now, the phrase come up here. Now, this again is apocalyptic wording. This was very typical of apocalyptic literature at the time, and they would have understood that John did not physically travel up to heaven. Now, this text here, this verse here, has been used by people, and while I was preparing for this lesson tonight, I read, I don't know, I go through 10 or 15 commentaries of various people from that have been writing over the last 200 or 300 years. I've got these commentaries, and once you get into the last 150 years, almost all of the people that comment on this will say, well, this is a proof for the rapture of the church before any of the problems and trials and tribulations of the Great Tribulation begin. And I would submit that this is not a proof text for the pre-tribulation rapture. A lot of people will say that because the church, that word in ecclesia or ecclesia in Revelation is not. It's not mentioned again after chapter 3, that the word church is not mentioned again until right at the end of Revelation. And they say, well, why is that not mentioned? Because the church is no longer in the world and it's taken out and so forth. But, seriously, that to me is not a proof that the church was raptured. You got to remember that the book of Revelation is not about the body or the church or the congregation or whatever you want to call it, the kahila of Yeshua. It is about Yeshua himself, and as the conquering Mashiach ben David. This has nothing really, anything that reference to the church or the believers is peripheral. Okay, so I just don't see this as being a proof. This is the notion that the church was not mentioned is not proof of a rapture. Just like the fact that the United States was not mentioned in the book of Revelation. Therefore, we don't exist. It's the same kind of logic. So I'm just saying that a lot of people will take this, and many of these commentators, these guys that I have been reading and relying on for a lot of these courses that we're teaching, I really appreciate their wisdom, their insight into things. However, on this one, I believe that they've got it wrong, that there is not going to be this catching away or the spiriting away of all the believers one of these days before the Great Tribulation. And as we get into the book of Revelation, we'll probably delve into that a little bit more. Now, some say that the language that is used here, like in the Spirit, John said that he was in the Spirit, and that come up here is a proof of the rapture. Well, if you look in Revelation 17:3, John says, the Spirit carried him into the wilderness. So should we interpret that the rapture of the saints is going to be carried, the Spirit's going to carry them into the wilderness someplace? And another in Revelation 21:10, John says that the Spirit carried him away to a great and high mountain. So does that mean that the rapture of the church is going to be carried away to a great and high mountain? No. I think you get the point there, and that's why I can't say that this is a proof text. So this, like I said before, this chapter 4 begins the third and final phase of Revelation. The first two were the things that were and the things that are, and now we're going to be looking at the things that will take place, the future. Okay, so let's go ahead. Revelation 2 and 3. Revelation 4, 2 and 3. It says, I was immediately in the Ruach, in the Spirit, and behold, a throne was standing in heaven, and one seated on the throne, and the one who was seated was like jasper and carnelian in appearance, and a rainbow around the throne like an emerald in appearance. Okay, John was in the Spirit. This meant that he was having a vision. Again, apocalyptic language was used here. The Holy Spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh, was showing him something supernatural. John was trying to convey this idea, this image that he was having a vision. So he looked through this open door that we explained was not a literal open door, but it was an opening into heaven. And through this door, he could see a throne. And there was one seated on the throne. And John described it a little bit differently than what Daniel had seen. If you remember in Daniel, he described the throne, and they had the Ancient of Days sitting on there. And he described, that he had, the white clothing and the golden belt, and his eyes were like fire, his hair was like white, and so on and so forth. So he described a being seated on the throne. John doesn't do that. John, he sees the throne room, and then he describes this more generally in terms of the color and the imagery, and he doesn't really describe what we could consider a picture of God. He sees jasper. Now, we don't really know, maybe, jasper, what really is that? There's some speculation as to what kind of a gemstone that is. It's not real clear, but they say it's a clear gemstone, and it is mentioned in Revelation 21:11. And maybe the way that we look at it today, we could maybe describe it as a diamond or something like that, where it's crystal clear and sparkly. And because it was crystal clear, you could see the glory of God emanating from the throne. It just went right, nothing to obscure it or nothing to make it darker or less visible. In fact, if it was a diamond, maybe it amplified the glory of God. So the jasper, it was also, the jasper stone was one of the stones on the high priest's vestment that, the 12 stones, jasper was one of them. And jasper relates to God's holiness. Now, the next thing that that John describes is carnelian or sardis. Now, these stones, carnelian or sardis, they tell me is a very nice red, bright red, kind of like a ruby. Maybe you could think of it as a ruby. And again, this was one of those stones that was on the high priest's breastplate. And, whereas the jasper spoke of God's holiness, the sardis is a reminder that only through the blood of an innocent sacrifice can we be reconciled to God and can be made right, or to stand in right standing before God. In addition to the two stones mentioned, John saw a green rainbow that completely encircled the throne. And there was a rainbow when God promised Noah that he would never destroy mankind again with the flood. It was a symbol of life. Here's a rainbow. Here the rainbow is a reminder of the covenant that God made with mankind, that the substitutionary sacrifice of Yeshua was an everlasting promise of redemption. And the idea, you think of a rainbow, a complete circle of a rainbow. Yes, indeed, I have actually seen complete circles of rainbows in flying, and sometimes you can see it. It's not common, but you can actually see a complete circle of a rainbow. The thing that is interesting to me here, it says it was green, like an emerald, whereas rainbows normally have the three primary colors. So a little bit different. Now, this, I think, let me go ahead and then I'll stop for questions. The view of the throne room was important to the readers of Revelation in John's day because, they were required, we talked about it a little bit, they were required to participate in this imperial cult or the worship of the Roman Empire, a Roman emperor. The emperor at the time, of course, was Domitian. I mentioned that. And he was really, really into this. Like I said, he didn't invent it, but boy, he really used this idea of emperor worship to his benefit. And even in his rulings, the way he did things, he was very, very jealous of some of his generals who were, they were doing a great job of conquering things and expanding the empire and so forth, but he didn't want anybody to get a little bit more popular than him. So he was like a lot of those dictators or kings, emperors, whatever you want to call them, back in those days, that they were very, very jealous of their throne because they'd probably killed somebody to get there themselves, and so they were always wondering, okay, now when is my turn? So, and just so you know, Domitian went to his eternal reward, and I say that tongue-in-cheek, the very next year after this book was written. So, in fact, they had the Senate and the army and the whole bunch of folks, even his wife, conspired, and they hired an assassin to go in and dispatch Domitian, and he did so, and they were very happy with that, and the Roman Empire was actually better off without him. So this Domitian, as Michael had mentioned already, he was especially rigorous in exacting taxes from the Jews. And a lot of times the Jews were taxed. In fact, they were taxed by Vespasian, because before that, the Jews were allowed to carry on their worship without interference from the Romans. That was thanks to Julius Caesar, I believe. But then once Vespasian came into the scene, okay, he taxed the Jews. He says, okay, you don't want any interference from us, and you want to worship the way you want to, okay, it's going to cost you. I'm going to tax you. And so many Christians were also tracked down and forced to pay this tax, because in the Roman view, the Romans, they just looked at the Christians as Jews who were pretending to be something else. So the Romans actually considered Christians to be Jews, and that by them calling themselves Christians, they say, yeah, well, you're really a Jew, and because this guy Jesus, Yeshua, he was a Jew. You say you worship him. Well, guess what? Then we're going to tax you along with the Jews, and we're also going to persecute you along with the Jews. So when John describes this heavenly throne room, it's a reminder to the body of Messiah that this world is not our home. We are temporary residents. The thrones and the temples of the Caesars were nothing compared to the awesomeness of God and his throne. All the Caesars have died. Yeshua is alive. All right, now, John saw these 24 thrones around God's throne, and on these were seated 24 elders. And there's been a lot of discussion over the years as to who these were. Some people say that the 24 elders represented the 12 tribes and the 12 disciples, or 12 apostles, or whatever. They were dressed in white, so that signified a purity, and so forth. I think possibly the 24 elders. Remember back in the letters to the churches in Asia Minor, what did Yeshua say? He says, to those who overcome. In one instance, he said, to those who overcome, I will give you the privilege of sitting with me on my throne, or sitting around me in the throne room, in my throne. So could these 24 elders have come, could that be the overcomers, as it were, from the churches back then, or perhaps even down through the ages? I don't know. Their white clothing, of course, to me, that signified purity. And now I think it's kind of interesting that the crowns that they're wearing, the Greek word for the crown that they were wearing was not a crown of royalty, or a crown, like a king's crown, with the gold thing with the little emeralds and gemstones in it, and also like you see the crown jewels in England, maybe as an example. No, these were not those crowns. These crowns were the crowns of a victor, the crowns of overcomers, if you would. These were crowns that they would give out to generals, or someone who performed a great service to the empire. And before that, then the Greeks, this is actually these kind of crowns. It's kind of a Greek thing. They would, you see pictures or statues or something with the guys that are standing there, and they've got these woven little laurels that are sitting on top of their head, with looks like a little wreath on top of their head in some cases. This was kind of what they were talking about. Generally, those would have been the crown that they would have worn would have been something of a green or organic nature. But here it says that they're golden crowns, and that each one of the elders wore this golden crown. But again, not a crown of royalty or of a monarchy or anything like that, but a crown of an overcomer, one who had run the race, who had finished the race, ones who had maybe had a great victory or something. And so Pat says that I think they were people that who put themselves in harm's way to witness for the Lord, such as the disciples who proclaimed the good news even at the threat of death, and some of them were even crucified. Others, lost their lives in different ways. All the disciples lost their lives violently, except for John, the Revelator. That this John that wrote this book of Revelation. So, okay, so what do I think it really was? I think that these 24 elders are perhaps some kind of how they're picked, I don't know, but these are overcomers who they were promised to sit on the throne with Yeshua. Now, there is precedent that they would be, they would rotate through that, perhaps. That, you've got 24, and then they lay their crowns at Yeshua's feet, and then or at God's throne or whatever, and they're praising the Lord. And when they cast their crowns at His feet, then another 24 come in. Because the precedent for that was the Levites and the priests back during the days of David. He set them up into groups. He divided them up into 24 groups, and that they served in the temple for 2 weeks at a time. And then at the feast, they all came back because there was so much to do during the feast, with all the sacrifices and so forth. But there is precedent for that, of a rotating priesthood, and possibly here. Again, this is not in the Bible. This was just one of those random thoughts that comes to me, when I'm reading some of this stuff. Well, I wonder how that's going to work. What's the logistics for that, And perhaps, John didn't say anything about rotating them out. Okay, your turn is over. Next, bring in the next 24 of them. I don't know. But, and we're not told how we're not actually even told who they are, other than the fact that they are elders. And, that could be anyone who had distinguished themselves in the service of the Lord. So that's kind of what I think it is. So now that I've said that, anybody want to disagree? That's fine. If you want to disagree, I'm perfectly accept. I can have somebody disagree with me. Anybody got another idea about who they were, or how they were, how they came about? Daniel, did you?
I have a question about the. You're saying this is Jesus or Yeshua's throne, correct? Not God's throne.
Well, no, it's God's throne. I might have said Yeshua, but this is God.
Yeah, it's on your little paper. It says with God throne with Yeshua. But anyway, so this is God's throne.
Yeah, but at the same time, you got to remember that Yeshua said that He was seated at the right hand.
Right hand.
This is not. This is what John saw. He saw one throne in the middle, and then 24 out there. Who was on the one throne? Okay, it was God. I think it was God the Creator. So how does Yeshua fall into this? Yeshua is actually in some of the imagery that we'll see, he's ruling from Jerusalem in the temple, in the holy temple, but not yet. So when does this actual throne room scene occur? Is it occurring already when John sees this, or is this going to be like he said? These are things that must come after. So perhaps this is going to be a future time. You can also note that in Daniel, where the Ancient of Days is there, and then one like the Son of Man comes up, and so that it says that the Ancient of Days gives him the crown of, gives him total authority and glory, and basically kind of hands it over to him. So there's a whole lot of sticky theology that gets and imagery that gets in there that I don't have an answer for, because I do believe that when he saw the throne, it was the throne of God, but that gets into the idea of, okay, where does God end and Yeshua begin? Okay, and so now Michael said something about that he thought that they were possibly divines of some sort. There is some speculation that the 24 elders may have been some kind of a created creature, like some kind of angels, special angels, and that perhaps that might be it too. And that the overcomers then would be seated with Yeshua on his throne in the millennium. Okay, so Michael says the 24 elders may present us with a problem in gematria. Revelation is full of these numerical imbroglios, and an answer may involve finding the meaning of the number 12, or combinations 3 times 8, 12 times 2, or 6 times 2 times 6 times 2. The solution may also involve the numerical value of the words throne, 12, and so forth. The word elders links us back to the 12 tribes wandering through the wilderness. Yeah, and the problem I have with the idea that the elders may have been part of the 12, representing the 12 tribes, is because the white clothing signified purity, and the leaders of the various tribes were anything but pure, and they in many cases they did not comport themselves well throughout their lives, and some of them were just downright unscrupulous folks. So I don't know, maybe I'm wrong on that, but it appears that the 24 elders are going to be reserved for something much more special perhaps than that. 12 generally talks about, that's a symbol or a number for government and leadership and ruling and administration. So there again, I don't know that would necessarily apply to the 24 elders, and then and how that would apply to the 12 disciples. That's something that I just don't know. It's just one of those things that when I go through this thing, I end up with more questions than I have answers, and I admit that. But it kind of fits a little bit that the elders could be overcomers. They could also be special angels, because they're doesn't talk about them singing the song of the redeemed. It just says that they are worshiping the Lord and claim, just crying out about his holiness and so forth, as we get into the other verses with the four living beings. So looking at, I've got to hurry. Revelation 4 and 5. From the throne comes flashing lightning and rumblings and clashes of thunder and 7 torches of fire burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God. Now, the imagery of lightning and thunder is often associated with the presence of God. At Mount Sinai, you remember that there was lightning and thunder and rumblings, and it was so terrible and awful, it terrified the children of Israel. And they told Moses, no, you talk to him. No, we're not going to talk directly to God because, no, that's just too terrifying. So you talk to him. And so, you remember then at the crucifixion that, the sky darkened. It was dark in the middle of the day, and there was a mighty earthquake. So that sort of thing has become associated with God. The 7 torches, it says, are the 7 spirits of God. And you'll find there is one definition of the 7 spirits of God in Isaiah 11:2. I can't remember if I put that in here. Yeah, I put it there in Isaiah 11:2. And it says, the Ruach of Adonai will rest upon him, the spirit of wisdom and insight, and the spirit of counsel and might, the spirit of knowledge and of the fear of Adonai. So the question remains, can any of these emperors and any of their emperor worship possibly compare to thunder and lightning and earthquakes? I think not. I think this is what part of what John was being told to write about, is that to reassure the people that he was trying to tell the people that, look, this emperor worship is just so pale in contrast. It's not that important, because think ahead to the things that will come in God's throne. Let's see. Pastor said, Yeshua didn't die for the angels. They were created beings for God's purpose. An elder to me is someone in leadership of some sort, and in this case would also be someone who remained pure and earned a place of reward. Absolutely. And that's kind of why I lean toward the idea of something that, we're all created beings, but the idea of someone who had gone through the battles and had shown themselves worthy to be in this capacity. Who they will be, who knows? Do they rotate them through? Perhaps. I don't know. And there's a typo there in that description. Was one that, again, made emperor worship. I dropped an IP off of that. Michael says, okay, now what do you think of the 7 spirits? What do you make of God as 7 spirits? Well, Yeshua himself said that the God is a spirit, and we must worship him in spirit and truth. So I would say that the 7 spirits of God may very well be part of his attributes. And are there more than 7 spirits? Maybe so. But it helps us to kind of get an idea, a little bit of an idea of who God is. The Ruach, the breath of Adonai, that's one. The spirit of wisdom and insight and counsel and might and knowledge and the fear of Adonai. Those are, when I go through these things and I see, I've looked at these before as being the spirit of God, 7 spirits. It's a way of describing him, perhaps. but it's certainly not all-encompassing, but it does give us some of the characteristics of God. If I don't hurry, I will never get through this. Revelation 6 and 7, and before the throne was something like a sea of glass, like crystal, in the middle of the throne, and around it were four living creatures full of eyes in front and back. And the first living creature was like a lion. The second living creature was like an ox. The third living creature had a face like a man. And the fourth creature was like a flying eagle. Okay, this kind of imagery, where does that harken back to? It makes us think back to Daniel and some of his visions that he saw. Michael had also said that the number 7, when we talk about the 7 spirits, is a number used symbolically throughout Revelation. 7, yes, it's the number of God, number of completion. There's just all sorts of imagery and symbolism for the number of 7. And yeah, Pat just wrote the same thing that I said. It's the number of God and of completion. So yeah, the 7 is important, and it helps us to describe the Lord. Okay. In this verses 6 and 7, when Moses and Aaron, his sons, and the 70 elders of Israel approached God up on Mount Sinai, they saw something similar like this under the feet of God, and that was let's see, in Exodus 24 and 10, it says, they saw the God of Israel, and under his feet was something like a pavement of sapphire, as clear as the very heavens. Now, the idea of crystal clear glass was an elusive dream back in the Roman era. Now we have picked up pieces of Roman glass in various places throughout Israel, and you can find them in certain places, the big cities, the big ancient cities. But when you pick it up, it lets light through, but it's kind of like looking through a kaleidoscope in many cases. It's not crystal clear, and you're not going to see an image through it. And I think this was another description to once more show how far superior to the emperors the God of Israel was. So that there was like a sea. The entire sea was like a crystal. And it said in the middle of the throne and around it were 4 living creatures full of eyes in front and back, and behind. The first living creature was like a lion, and the ox, and then a man, and then the flying eagle. Those hark back to perhaps Daniel, what they might have looked like. Who knows? I don't have a clue exactly what they were. They were otherworldly in a way, and because it says that they had eyes all over them, that to me just means that they were all seeing, that they could see things that a mere human being could not. And perhaps I would think that they were probably or possibly anyway, I'll say possibly, cherubim. Now, cherubim were described in different ways, but again, we're seeing John seeing things, and he describes them one way. Daniel had seen things that maybe it was the same scene, and he describes them another way. Isaiah saw, the throne room of God, and he describes it in a different way. It would be like any one of us who would see an event or see a work of art or an accident even, and then all of us, when we would write down what we saw, not a single one of them would be exactly the same. We would all see it from a different perspective. So the cherubim, if you remember, they were very prominent in the tabernacle. The the curtains on the Holy of Holies, they had cherubim on it, embroidered into it. The covering of the inner covering of the tabernacle, the curtains that going into the holy place, that had cherubim on it. Same thing in the temple itself. And you also remember that they had cherubim on the ends of the Ark of the Covenant facing each other. And so perhaps these were some kind of a created, a type of cherubim. And Revelation 8 says, the four living creatures each having 6 wings and full of eyes all around and within, they do not rest day or night, chanting, Kadosh, 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 Adonai Elohei Sabaoth, Asher Hayah Behoveh Behayo, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God of hosts, who was and who is to come. And so this is part of the this part here, the Kadosh, Kadosh, is part of the liturgy in the synagogue when you hold up the Torah scrolls. That's the charge, and so we're just mimicking what was going on in the heavenly throne room. The actions of the 4 beings were consistent with other descriptions of God's throne. Isaiah described it like this in 6. Let's see, maybe I wrote that down. Here we go. Isaiah 6, 1 through 3. In the year of King Uzziah's death, I saw Adonai sitting on a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Seraphim were standing on above him. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and 2 he covered his feet, and 2 he flew. One called out to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is Adonai Sebaoth. The whole earth is full of his glory. So these, he calls them seraphim. In other descriptions, like in the tabernacle, it was cherubim. So we're just getting an idea of the majesty and the glory, and just this idea of worship in the throne room. The final verses of chapter 4 continue with this idea of worship. It says, whenever the living creatures give glory and honor and thanks to the one seated on the throne who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before the one seated on the throne and worship him who lives forever and ever. And they throw their crowns down before the throne, chanting, worthy are you, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and because of your will they existed and were created. So this is a picture of what really true worship looks like. This idea of the perpetual worship of God 24/7, and compare this then with the phony worship of the emperor. That, remember when I told you about that in some cases the Jews and the Christians, well, they would get up there, and so they conjured up this plan that, well, they would bend over, but then they would go and tie one of their laces on their sandals or fix their sandals so that it looked like they were bowing down. But no, they weren't bowing down. They were fixing their sandals, and so these 24 elders and the 4 living beings, they were actually really worshiping. They were not bending down to God and fixing their sandals. So this was also kind of a thing to the people that John was writing to. It says, hey, this is what true worship looks like, not the phony worship that some of you are forced into on pain of death before the emperor. So, all right, that concludes the lesson for this evening, and I just